Hello and welcome back to Stop and Go F1 for this, our driver ratings for the Imola Grand Prix of 2024. Hope you're doing well, hope you had a lovely weekend. All of our content from the entire weekend is available on the channel. That's F1, F2 and F3. It's all there, readily available for free. Unbelievable stuff. So that's there if you want to see that. Like and subscribe, of course, because we'll have all the stuff for Monaco coming up next weekend. But right now, let's give each driver a score between 1 and 10 for how good I think they did this weekend. And as ever, we start with Haas, and we start with Kevin Magnussen, who qualified 18th and finished the race in 12th. Actually, incredible pace from Kevin Magnussen when you think about it. Him starting 18th, spent a lot of the race, in a battle with Nico Hülkenberg and Yuki Tsunoda, who started 10th and 7th. So incredible pace to get through the field at the start of the race, then fight in there in that midpoint. Of course, the reason he qualified quite low, also not his own fault. When he was on his fast lap, he got impeded by Oscar Piastri. So who knows how good Magnussen could have been if he had had a proper chance at qualifying there. Overall, I think a great weekend for Magnussen. Not quite top tier, but very good nonetheless, and I've given him a 9. A good weekend for Magnussen, who also didn't get any penalty points. So very good for Kevin Magnussen. Here is his teammate Nico Hülkenberg. As I said, qualified 10th. Another good qualifying for Hülkenberg in the Haas. Would end up in 11th. Despite this, I think a very good race nonetheless for Hülkenberg, who is continuously showing how good he can be. I also give him a 9 out of 10. Moving across to the Stake F1 Team Kick Sauber boys now, and it's Zhou Guan Yu first, and you know what, they have just become Alfa Romeo again. At the start of the year, you would see them every now and again, but now they have reverted to form of Alfa Romeo, which basically means they are not shown on television. They'll be shown at the start, they might be shown if they have a pit stop, but that's about it. Especially now their pit stops are going well, they're just not being shown. So Zhou started 16th, he finished the race in 18th. As for what happened between the start and the finish for Zhou, I couldn't tell you. I'm going to give him a 4. Just because I think, 5 is average, right down the middle. But he did. Oh, sorry, that's not him. That's Bottas. Zhou started 17th and ended up 15th. So he went up a few paces. I'll give him a 5. Great news for Zhou there. Bottas, though. Let's talk about Bottas. Yeah, started 16th, finished the race in 18th. I've given him a 4 because he just went backwards. And, it's hard to comment on people's races when you haven't seen what's happened. Go to Racing Bills now. And Yuki Tsunoda first, qualified 7th, ended up finishing 10th. A good point there for the Racing Bills team. I've given him a 9 out of 10. And Ricciardo as well. Didn't score points, but still a good weekend for him, I felt. Qualified 9th, so a decent qualifying. Would end up in 13th. There was a really great battle throughout the middle part of the race between Ricciardo, Yuki, Hülkenberg and Magnussen. I thought that was a real fun watch and great driving from all 4 of them. I felt this is the first weekend we've had this year where both Ricciardo and Yuki have been on a similar form. We've had weekends before where either one does well or the other one does well. And here, I don't think they were both in a world class, but I think they were both okay. I've given Ricciardo a 7 just because he did end up finishing quite a bit lower than Yuki did. But overall, I think this is the closest the two of them have been. I'm looking forward to seeing what Ricciardo can do in Monaco because we know that's a circuit that he is especially good at. I do fear for Yuki a little bit. I don't think Monaco is one of his better tracks. In fact, it was one of the only tracks where he got beaten by Nick De Vries last year. So that'll be an interesting one to see next weekend. Logan Sargent now. And didn't set a time in qualifying. Well, he did, but it got taken away. So no time for him. Qualifies 20th and last. Goes on the alternate strategy. So a lot of the point in the race, it looks like he was quite high up, but it was just because he hadn't pitted. Got overtaken by a lot of people. Didn't really go anywhere. Ended up finishing 17th. I'm going to give him just a 4. I think that's relatively fair for Sargent. As for Albon, he would qualify 14th and would not finish the race. Really tough day for Albon. Loose wheel nut on the first pit stop. Then to get a penalty. Then pit again. Just going nowhere. In the end, they retire the car with about 10 laps to go or something like that. So overall, a bad weekend for Albon. Not much he could do. I'm going to give him a 5, just straight down the middle, because his qualifying was decent and I think his pace was okay up until the point of the DNF. Across to Alpine now, and Esteban Ocon would qualify 12th, finish the race in 14th. They looked like they were going in a good direction in Miami. Imola, a bit of a setback for them, but still not as bad as it was at the start of the year. I'm going to give Ocon a 5. For Gasly, where did Gasly start? Started 15th, ended up 16th. I'm going to give him a 4. Yeah, Alpine, still I think heading in the right direction, but just not exactly where they want to be as of right now. I think they'll be wanting to be in that battle with the Haas's and with the Racing Bills to see who can come out on top of there. But, it could be worse. They could have been driving an Aston this weekend. Although one of the Astons did relatively well. And it's not the one you would have expected. Lance Stroll, the better of the two Astons by quite some margin this weekend. Stroll, he would qualify 13th but end up in 9th place, scoring some decent points for the Aston team on what was an incredibly difficult weekend for them. They turned up here with 9 different upgrades, and it has just not worked. Although I think this is one of Lance's better results this year, to be honest. So they're working for Lance. I gave him an 8, because I think this is actually a very good result for him, considering what happened to his teammate. Fernando Alonso has one of the worst F1 weekends of his entire career, which is impressive for a man who's been in Formula 1 for over 20 years and has driven for some awful teams at points, including that awful 2015-2016 McLaren. He qualifies in 19th, but that is only because Logan Sargent's time got deleted, and he finishes the race in 19th, the lowest finishing position ever for Fernando Alonso. He had the crash in FP3. They had to rush to fix the car for qualifying. Qualifies last on pace. They fix the car overnight. He starts from the pit lane. He has no pace whatsoever. Pits like 3 or 4 times. They use the race as just a glorified testing session. It's a 1 for Fernando Alonso. Awful from him. I really did not. I was so shocked at the performance this weekend. I don't know if it was the Aston upgrades or something with him, or both, but really, really not good. Especially when you see that Lance had some okay pace, especially for him. 13th to 9th is pretty good for Lance Stroll. So, yeah, Fernando Alonso, really quite disappointing there, and will be looking to bounce back in a big way come Monaco this weekend. Oscar Piastri is a really interesting one now for McLaren. So, he would qualify 2nd, and a fantastic lap, really close between him and Max on pole. Max massively benefiting from the tow given to him by Nico Hülkenberg. Without that, Piastri would have been on pole. But Piastri had impeded Magnussen earlier in the session, so it goes from 2nd place to 5th place. From there, he's just desperately trying to overtake Sainz for a lot of the race. Ends up doing it through the pit stops. Would finish the race in 4th. So, overall, a good weekend for Piastri. I'm going to give him an 8. I feel like with him, he's been quicker than we think, especially in the last 2 races. Miami, he had that incredible pace, but kind of missed out on the safety car and the strategy, and then also had that incident with Sainz. Here, he has that pace, gets the penalty for the impeding, and then can't overtake Sainz. Sainz is always involved with this lad. But yeah, I think Oscar, if you look at the standings, he's quite a way off the top guys. And I don't think that is truly reflective of how good he's been this year so far. And, we've got a lot of the season left to go, and I think we'll see a lot of Oscar doing really well from here on out. So definitely one to watch for this year. But the man who's been capitalising on the upgraded McLaren fantastically recently is Lando Norris, of course, coming off the back of the win in Miami. He would qualify third, then get pushed up to second due to Oscar's penalty. And you know what? I actually think his performance this weekend was better than his performance in Miami in terms of just pure driving. It's a 10 out of 10 for me for Lando Norris. But yeah, just really, really good. Handling the pressure really well. Closing in on Max towards the end. Only 7 tenths off the back of Max. Personally, on the radio he said, I think in interviews afterwards, like 2 more laps and I would have got him. Personally, I don't think he would have. Just because we saw the likes of Piastri trying to overtake Sainz for a long period of that race, just because Piastri was the faster car didn't mean that he could necessarily overtake. And I do think the McLaren in its current spec is lacking that straight line speed to make that overtake. And we saw it in Miami as well when he was trying to get past Perez and he just couldn't do it. So I don't think he would have beaten Verstappen with a few more laps, but nonetheless, to have that pace in that car, to put Verstappen in a position where he is finishing within a second of someone is impressive as it is. So, yeah, Lando, great job from him, a 10 out of 10. Carlos Sainz is next, and it was a decent race for him as well. Qualified 4th, ended up in 5th. I'm going to give him a 7. Just didn't seem to be on the pace of the top 4 guys this weekend, but still a good result for him, doing pretty well. Charles Leclerc, I felt sorry for him because I feel he was better than what the results said. I think he was very good this weekend. Qualified 3rd, ended the race in 3rd. At one point seemed to be catching Lando, and unlike the McLaren, I do think the Ferrari has got the straight line speed. So if he had been able to really get into the back end of the McLaren, I think he could have got past him there. But then he went over the chicane, lost a lot of speed there, then seemed to just lose it completely and kind of just got into the position of 3rd and went on to finish the race. The first Imola podium for Ferrari since 2006, which is pretty impressive. I gave him a 9 overall. Good weekend for him. I think the Ferrari upgrades are working quite well, and I think they can be in a position to challenge the McLarens and the Red Bulls, given the right setup, given the right track. Hopefully that will be his home race next weekend in Monaco. Here is George Russell. Another bad weekend for Mercedes. They seem to have just replaced Alpine. They're not fast enough to challenge the top guys, but they're fast enough to get away from the midfield. So they're just there. They're just there in the middle. And, it's just a very Alpine thing to do. They're just like the 4th best. And they're just challenging each other. George Russell would qualify 6th, end up in 7th. He was 6th for the majority of the race, but for some reason he was scared his tyres weren't going to make it to the end, despite being on basically the same strategy as everyone else in that top 6. So he pits again. And then I don't know if this has been followed up on yet, because I haven't seen his interviews or anything. But apparently Ted Kravitz was reporting that he had agreed with Mercedes that he would pit for new tyres, and then Lewis would let him through to be 6th again. But he was 15 seconds behind, so that was just never going to happen. And he finished the race in 7th. I'm going to give him a 6 overall for that. I think, I don't know why he wasn't able to manage his tyres like everyone else did, even Lewis here. So Lewis qualifies in 8th, would finish the race in 6th, giving him a 7. Another decent result for Lewis. I don't know what's going on with him at the minute. He just does. There's part of me that, I've said this before, I think he's just checked out. He knows the Mercedes isn't good enough for what he wants to achieve. He knows he'll be in Ferrari next year. It's like, okay, I'll just kind of take this whole race at a half pace, the whole season at a half pace. I'll just travel around the world, take some photos, sign some hats. I'll do the race and stuff, then I'll just go home. It's like a Kimi Räikkönen. It's like a hobby to him at this point. I'm just hoping that when he goes to Ferrari, we will see that Lewis of old, who is a bit more, deadly with it. A bit more just focused, which he doesn't seem to have at the minute. And I can understand why. To be fair to him, I really can. Let's talk about Red Bull. Interesting result. Interesting weekend for Red Bull. Weren't on the pace at all throughout all of free practice. Checo struggling in qualifying 11th. And then the fight back was he only managed 8th. I gave him a 4 overall. Not a good weekend for Checo. Hopefully we'll be better in Monaco, which is a real 50-50 for him, because of course he has won there. But then you had last year, Checo in Monaco, I think, was the worst performance I've ever seen by any driver in a top team, where he crashed in Q1, then got bullied by Kevin Magnussen for 3/4 of the race. Then, I think finished just like 15th or something. Dreadful for him last year, and will be hopefully a lot better. Max Verstappen, though, despite struggling all the way through qualifying, really, proved his worth in Q3. Of course, helped by the toe of Nico Hülkenberg. But despite that, he started to do the rest of the lap and he put it on pole position. It was a great result for him. And I think in the race, at the start of the race, he managed it really well. And I think he was in a class of his own. But towards the end, I don't think he was the fastest car on the track by quite some margin. But he still managed the pressure really well and came away with the win. So it's a 10 out of 10 for Max. I think possibly his best driver of the year thus far. Really, really quite impressive from him. And I think this will be a race that is looked back upon in terms of him as, we've had about a year and a half of Max being the best driver in the best car in a position where he can kind of relax a little bit and still win. This is the race weekend, the first one we've had in a while, where he's had to fight for it. And you could hear that in his radio messages at the end of qualifying, at the end of the race. He fought for it, and he was the factor that gave Red Bull the win and the pole this weekend. Great job from him all around there. So, our highest rated drivers are Max Verstappen and Lando Norris. Lowest rated is Fernando Alonso. Let me know what you think in the comments. And like I said before, we'll be back next weekend for all things Monaco. Make sure you subscribe. I'll see you there. Have a good one. Goodbye.